Happy New Year, everybody. Hope you had a wonderful New Year. We certainly did. If you'll excuse me for a minute, I'm going to do a little bit of sharing. Of course, this is the In Depth Show with Joe Firestone. And I guess it's the Happy After New Year show. Still equally happy. Thank you, Cheyenne. And a happy one to you, too. Okay, I'll do a little sharing and I'll be back with you in a few moments. Hey, please share this as much as you can before we really get going. Thank you. Of course, this is the In Depth Show with Joe Firestone. Okay, once again, Happy New Year, everybody. Glad you're all here. Cheyenne wishes everybody a Happy New Year. Actually, she wished me a Happy New Year. Kathy said also Happy New Year, Joe, but said she's been reading about all the wildfires in Australia. Scary stuff. Yeah, it's been scary stuff in California as well. Of course, there it's not been as bad as Australia, but yeah, it's what we're all going to face. If we don't stop this, this is a climate emergency, and we've got to meet it with everything we can possibly do. Okay, also, Dion Adams, thank you for coming, Dion, and thank you for sharing. Lana, thank you for coming and for announcing the video, the upcoming video. And Joanne Ricardio, 2020, year of the MMT revolution. I surely hope it is. I also surely hope it's the Green New Deal revolution. Cheyenne says, we're coming to save Earthlings from themselves. See you soon. Thank you, Cheyenne. Russ has joined. Hey, Russell Gorman, how are you? Cheryl Van App says, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, Cheryl. Thank you for coming. Okay, so in the last stream of the decade past, we discussed an approach to inflation. And we didn't finish our discussion. We had a lot of good opinions expressed. And I think we got to the point where we indicated that it was useful to classify inflation into two areas: demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Of course, the demand pull inflation is on the demand side of the issue, and the cost push type of inflation is on the supply side. We'll go more deeply into that, okay, as we go into this stream. Russ Coleman points out, we may know in May if it is a political revolution. Well, let's hope it's going to be a political revolution, but we may know before May, actually. If Bernie does well in the first four early states and then really cleans up on Super Tuesday, I think we might start to see a bit of a stampede anyway towards him at that point, now that we have the mainstream acknowledging that it is possible for Bernie to win. Of course, they're going to loose a blistering attack on him now, we believe. Brad Byrne has joined. And Kay says, hey, Joe, glad to see you. And Bonnie joined, and Kay said, hey, Bonnie, too. Thank you, Kay. Steve Wolfbrand said, good evening, all. Cheyenne Tierra said, may peace prevail on earth. Indeed. We always hope for that. But maybe sometime before we actually get it, we may need to get Bernie first before we even have a hope, okay, of getting it. And even then, it's going to be a long haul. But anyway, so we have demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. So, what do you suppose we ought to do about demand pull inflation when it occurs? And what are the kinds of things we can do to contain cost push inflation? Also, another question, okay, which immediately arises if we're lucky enough to have Bernie Sanders as our new president, and if we're lucky enough to have his agenda largely passed, what are we going to do on the inflation controls side to make sure that we not only get a Green New Deal, that we not only get the Medicare for All bill, that we not only get all of the other things we really, really badly need, but also that we get price stability as well. Cheryl Van Epp said, I just asked on another post, are we experiencing inflation with U.S. health care because of too few healthcare providers and staff and rising costs? We patients experience? I don't think so. We'll get into, I think, the inflation we're experiencing in the healthcare area, but I don't think it's due to too few healthcare providers and staff. I think rising costs are due to something else. And we'll discuss that as we go along. But let's get into some of the general discussion. The general discussion of what are the possible causes of demand pull inflation and how can we fight it? And what are some of the possible causes of cost push inflation? And what are the tools we can use to fight that as well? So I want to give you those questions to consider, and I hope you'll accommodate me with some comments. Meanwhile, Kay Clark Ryan has pointed out that Bernie will be a very busy guy, laugh out loud, and of course she's very correct about that. And Lana points out, I saw this morning one of the planned attacks on Bernie is that he is an anti-Semite because he has the nerve to criticize Israel. Well, I'm sure they're going to try that because they're going to try anything and see if it sticks against the wall. They're going to throw everything up against the wall and see what sticks. That's surely going to happen. We know it's going to happen. We expect that, it's going to happen. But I don't think that one is going to stick because I think there are going to be too many Jewish people totally behind Bernie when he has the nerve to criticize Israel. I also think there are going to be a lot of rabbis behind him when he has the nerve to criticize Israel. Also, I don't think Bernie from Brooklyn is going to come over to people as an anti-Semite. I think I have a great deal of experience in that area. And I think it would be hard to call a guy like Bernie and hard to call a guy like me an anti-Semite. Not going to work too well. And Kay says, I've heard that too, Lana. It's stupid. Cheryl Van Epp says, there's a national shortage. It amounts to ration care. I don't think the shortage of help is the problem. I really don't. I know people are talking about that, but we can get help in here from abroad if we want to get that help. I don't think that's the problem. But as I say, I want to talk about general matters first before we get into the possible causes of inflation in healthcare. Rob Rivera's joined. He says, "Hey Yoda." Cheryl says, "I'll listen." Thanks, Cheryl. And Kay says, "I've been seeing several reports on the financial crash happening this month." Cheryl says, "I'm a patient advocate who has been asking these questions. I just don't know how to call it." Lana says, "I hope you are right, but Dr. Joe. I hope I'm right too, but more than hope I'm right, I'm convinced I'm right." The way Bernie talks, the way he presents himself, the kinds of things he's been doing his whole life are in no way the actions or the talk, okay, of an anti-Semite. On the contrary, he's someone who acknowledges his origins, who never forgets them, who never lets anybody else forget them as well. And he's been frank about that during his whole political career. He's been proud of his origins. He's been proud of where he comes from. It's part of his life story. Also, he's never been anti-Israel. He just wants the Israeli government to stick up for human rights and not to betray the outlook, the point of view, and the traditions of the religion. What the Israeli government is doing, in my view, is entirely anti-Jewish. And I am not going to allow them to define what the values of Jews are. And they are most decidedly not to deny the Palestinians their human rights. What the government of Israel is doing is completely opposed to the traditions and values of Judaism. That's it. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. And in standing for human rights, what Bernie is doing is standing for Jewish values. Rob said, "Did you see a video clip of Joe Biden saying how our culture is not from Africa?" What the hell? Biden. I can't believe Joe Biden is stooping this low to scare voters. It's a disgusting, subtle, racist tactic. What's subtle about it, Rob? It isn't subtle. AKA the polite Southern strategy. It's ridiculous. Charlotte Van Epp says, "Teachers say, call out the actions, behavior of the person. Do not attack the person." Well, the teachers are right. We don't attack the person unless that person has demonstrated over a very long time that they are entirely reprehensible. I can think of only one person in our political life who's extremely prominent in our political life who fits that particular description. Steve Wolfbrand said, "I just saw that." Rob says, "No crash." Lana says too early for a financial crash. But Mike Norman did sound one alarm bell the other day on a slowdown. Yeah, there might well be a slowdown. Uh, it might also develop into a crash. We don't know. It is too early to say. We have to see what happens over the summer. Steve says, why does nothing stick to Biden? It's weird. The man keeps humiliating himself. It's absolutely true, Steve. But I think the reason why nothing sticks to Biden is not so much that nothing sticks to him, it's still the electability question. Still the electability question. There are so many people who still haven't been paying attention to the race, and they have not been persuaded yet that Biden is not the most electable of the Democrats. The polls are still showing that people think that he is the most electable of the Democrats. I think the results in Iowa and also New Hampshire will begin to turn the tide, okay, on that. If he loses Nevada too, then the winners of the early races will go into South Carolina, which are with a much bigger head of steam than they have now. Cheryl says, meaning call out Israel's actions and not their right to exist. Well, I mean, I certainly entirely agree with that. I mean, I emphatically state that Israel has a right to exist. But they are violating the human rights of the Palestinians, and that has to end. Rob says, no economic crash, unfortunately. There aren't any indicators to show it will happen. Even Mike Norman said there's no crash. Mike is making fun of these idiots on TV and every economic rag, i.e., the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The Street, because they're all saying they can't explain why there hasn't been a crash with all of this increase in government debt. All of what increase in government debt? It's still far below the deficits we should be running. But of course, we shouldn't be selling the government debt anyway right now. If people are bothered by government debt, then the government should simply not be selling any. All Congress has to do is order the Federal Reserve to place its appropriations right in the Treasury spending account on day one. And then the federal government will not have to borrow any more money. Not simply its appropriations, but also the money it needs to pay back all of the federal debt that falls due within the period of the appropriations bill in question. So, Rob says, have you been able to get in contact with Mike Norman on inviting him on your show? I would really like to hear your interview conversation that you both would have on the economy. Well, I haven't tried to get him on the show. I'll tell you the truth. I'm in a little bit of a chicken egg type of situation here. We do have some rising attendance here, okay, and that is good. but I'm afraid I still can't promise a sufficiently large audience to Mike to uh, to be able to attract him. I mean, I don't want to waste his time. I don't want to waste the time, okay, of other people who expect a fairly large audience, okay, from me. But it's taken a long time for this stream to really get going, as I think you know. Okay, but I guarantee that if we can double the current attendance, which is probably averaging about 15 to 20 people right now, to 30 to 40 people, that then I will start to bring in some people here. I will have enough of an attendance, I think, to begin to attract people, okay, at that time. But, okay, I think my regular attendees are still too small a group to warrant that. That's why I've been handling everything myself. So, anyway, let's get back to the subject at hand. So Kay says Professor Wolf was on Tom Hartman's show today and seems to think one is in the near future. Okay, a crash. He is a very good economist, yes. He is a very good economist, but the signs of a crash are still not there. The Fed has not been squeezing interest rates. Uh, we have asset inflation, okay, in certain areas, but we still don't have a tightening, okay, of credit. None of the signs of a crash, okay, are still in there. The most serious sign of a coming crash is that we have such a high level of inequality at this point. We may have too many people who are running up against the limits of the debt that they're able to draw upon. So let's take that as kind of a transition to our topics for tonight. Two of the causes of aggregate demand pull inflation are highly excessive deficit spending on the part of the government, and we don't have that. We have actually plenty of ways to go to true full employment, okay, as yet. But the other is you can also have demand creation through increasing debt. If you have a debt bubble and the debt bubble collapses, that can precipitate inflation. What are the signs that we have such a debt bubble yet? I don't think they're quite there yet. I don't think the debt bubble we have now compares to the debt bubble that we had in 2007, had just before the housing crash, which then in turn precipitated the crash of 2008. So I don't think that we're on the verge of a crash yet. Now, one could develop very fast. If you see a sudden tightening of credit, okay, in the economy, That could certainly cause a problem. It could certainly cause a problem. So, as I say, if we're talking about the aggregate level of demand in the real economy, the day to day economy of transactions, that can be fed by excessive deficits on the part of the government and by excessive extensions of credit on the part of the private banks. We don't have that problem right now. In terms of having a full employment economy, we can extend our deficit spending but up to certainly something like 2.4 trillion per year. That's what would constitute a full employment budget, okay, at this point. So we don't have an overheated economy. Parts of the economy are overheated. We have housing inflation, okay, in urban areas, rent inflation, okay, in urban areas. Yes, yes, we have those things. But there are many areas of daily transactions where we don't have rapidly rising costs. There's no evidence, okay, of bubbles. Rob says Rick Wolf is a nice guy, but a complete idiot when it comes to federal financing or the macro economy. Good on worker cooperative enterprise organization, but that's a microeconomic issue. Yes, it is. And he is very good, okay, in that area. And I listen to him that area avidly. And when he talks about structural factors in the economy, I listen to him well in that area as well. I think he's very knowledgeable in that area. But when it comes to things like sectoral balances, I don't think he knows anything when it comes to sectoral financial balances and how they play out. Mike Norman said less demand for certain loans at year end. He also said that unemployment was falling steadily, that it has now leveled off. Yes, headline unemployment is now at 3.5%. But I think that the U6 is still in the neighborhood of 7%, so that's still substantial. And then if we look at the disemployment statistics, I think you're probably looking at another 5% of the people who are disemployed. That is, who would take full time work if the full time work was available, but who have dropped out of the labor force, the formal labor force anyway, because they don't think they have a chance, okay, of getting a job. Okay, so the point is, if we were to encounter a situation of demand pull inflation within a Bernie economy by 2021, then what would we do about it? How would we fight demand pull inflation? Taking okay an MMT approach. Okay, so just but so you know, Kay, I don't think this is an each to their own situation. I think, okay, that Rick Wolf does fall short when it comes to macroeconomics. I think, in particular, even though he's interacted with MMTers quite a lot now over the years, he still doesn't give any evidence of understanding the MMT approach to macroeconomics, and he certainly does not follow it. And Rob says, ask him about how to implement a full employment economy, and you'll get crickets at best and worker cooperatives at worst. Well, I think it's probably the other way around. I think that, okay, it's worker cooperatives at best and crickets, okay, at worst. But other than that, Rob, I think you're right. And Kay says, I trust him, Rob. You will not change my mind. Well, that's okay. That's okay, Kay. So long as you're willing to listen to the discussion. Alana says, love him for worker co-ops, but he still talks about taxes and spending, which no longer makes sense once one understands MMT. Rob says, I'm not changing your mind or attempting either. Why are you saying that like I care about what you think? I was responding when you mentioned Wolf. I don't even know you. Hey, Rob, let's keep the personal out of this discussion, okay? We can discuss the issues without getting personal here. Cheryl says, I say go with your gut and your lived experience and listen to frontline workers. Observe what's happening on the ground rather than listening to the meaningless data the system will give you. Uh, well, okay. I think you have to take everything into your account. I think you have to take your gut and your lived experience into account, and the experience of frontline workers, okay, about what's happening on the ground. But I think you also have to look at the data too. Much of the data, okay, is meaningless. For example, the debt to GDP ratios, okay, are meaningless. And the level of the national debt is meaningless as an indicator, okay, of what's going on in the economy. Those things are meaningless. But things like the employment indicators, if you look at them all, okay, in toto, those are not meaningless. CPI, okay, is not meaningless, even though you have to be careful with it. You have to be careful how you interpret it. And Kay says, I guess you're the first rude person I've met on this conversation. I'm all done. Well, please stay, Kay. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and I don't think that anybody wants to drive you out. Randolph says, here you are frozen. Yeah, I know. I seem to be frozen or herky jerky tonight. I'm using a lot of my CPU capacity, I think. Cheryl says, thanks again for these leads. I like hearing different viewpoints and deciding for myself. Cheers. Kay says, I agree, Cheryl. I feel one is coming, though. Kay says, inequality is not meaningless, though. Certainly is not. Inequality is very, very important, and it's level. The level of inequality now is a constant threat to the stability of our economy, because we will reach a point where people will decide that they just don't have any more money to draw upon in order to consume. And then consumers will no longer drive sales. We may not have the kind of crash we had in 2008 and 9, which was led by the financial sector and a crash in the financial sector. But we can have a consumer-led recession very, very easily this time. I think that all the credit agencies have to do is to pull back, and we can certainly have that. And Kay rightly points out it hasn't been this bad since the 1920s, right before the Great Depression. You're completely correct about that, Kay. I think this is worse than the period just before 1929. I think the level of inequality may be worse right now. Rob says, no, I say cricket's at worst because Richard uses the worker cooperatives as if it's the only solution, that reorganizing the workplace is a silver bullet. How long will workers have to wait for the reorganization to happen? Where are the workers going to get the capital to purchase these enterprises? Can Richard point to the law where workers have the first right of, I think it's the right of first refusal, Rob said. That's what I meant by at worst when it comes to worker cooperatives. I don't think he's ever fully thought out a policy to make any of this work. I've never heard him articulate anything as a policy proposal ever, and I went from listening to him at the time. Now I don't even bother. Okay, well, that's interesting. I do agree that when it comes to macroeconomic policies, he doesn't say very much. He doesn't seem to be very well educated on the federal job guarantee, in fact, which is a macro policy designed to produce true full employment, as well as a price anchor for fighting inflation. By the way, it's true full employment at a living wage and entirely voluntary. So, I'm giving you some hints now. How would the kinds of economists that Bernie will call upon, how will they fight demand pull inflation? That is the question. Kay says he backs the federal job guarantee in Bernie. Okay, I haven't seen Richard Wolff actually back the FJG. He is in back, of Bernie. Yes, he is. Absolutely in back, of Bernie. I think one of the reasons why he's in back of Bernie is because Bernie is in back of workers' cooperatives as well. But if you could provide us a reference, Kay, where he backs the federal job guarantee, I'd love to hear that. Okay, I really would. And by the way, I like Rick Wolf. I always have. I like his ideas when it comes to cooperatives. And when it comes to cooperatives, he's my go to guy. And Rob says, I never hear him ever address what to do about the involuntarily unemployed. He only talks about the currently existing jobs. But there are many millions that are underemployed, okay, or unemployed. Right. Look at the UC statistics and the disemployment statistics. And Lana Dell says about price controls. Well, for demand pull inflation, yeah, you can use price controls, but that's probably not the go-to to begin with. Wage and price controls, though, can be very effective. They're certainly in the toolkit. And Barbara Reed has joined. Hi, Barbara. Nice to see you. Yeah, Bonnie is telling me that my nose is below the horizon again because I'm squinting to see your comments, bending down to see your comments on my two screens here. I really have to learn to sit up. Take my glasses off. I can see better on my big screen now. Thanks, honey. So Bonnie reminded me. So Kate says, yes, he does. He just said so a few days ago. When it comes up again, if I can, I'm pretty computer stupid except for Facebook. Can I send it to you via Facebook, Joe? Sure, Kay. Yeah, you can send it via Facebook or you can leave it as a comment, Kay, in any one of these streams. Okay, or you can send it in a private message to me. I'd be happy to have it and to see that one. Okay, I watch a number of his streams, but I haven't seen that one as yet. So I'd be happy to see it. Okay, so I mean, I'd be happy to see a coming together of the MMT economists, okay, and Rick Wolf, and have them on the same page. That would be wonderful. I'd really like to see that. Okay, what are some of the other tools for containing demand pull inflation? Oh, so did he say this on Tom Hartman show? Okay, so another way to handle it is, first of all, we need to have a change in the budgeting process in the federal government. And within the budgeting process, we have to stop actually targeting deficit reductions and we have to put in some automatic stabilizers that would begin to contain demand pull inflation when it starts to occur. Now, one automatic stabilizer that can contain that kind of inflation is the federal job guarantee. Now, I know We like the federal job guarantee because it provides true full employment at a living wage, and it would be implemented in a Bernie administration as part of the by Green New Deal program, as part of the transition to a Green New Deal. There's been a proposal for a federal job guarantee. Okay, if we get one, it's going to lift up the minimum wage for everybody to a living wage. Hopefully, it will be implemented with regional cost of living adjustments. I'm going to push for that actually myself. Okay? But the point to remember is that even though that's going to lift our demand initially, because everybody who wants to work will be working at a living wage, over the medium to longer run, if the economy begins to overheat and the demand then starts to flag because prices are getting too high, then sales are going to fall, and we're going to have a decline in our demand. When we have that particular decline, then some of the people who are making greater amounts of money are going to be let go and will be transitioning to the federal job guarantee program. They'll be transitioning at a lower salary, which in turn is going to shrink demand even more. The federal job guarantee provides an automatic stabilizer constituting a price anchor, tending to hold down inflation as inflation starts to develop. There are other things that we can implement. But for example, we can start to implement small increases in the payroll tax. That can be very effective in cutting demand. We can have laws that are geared to increases in inflation, but that only take effect automatically when demand pull inflation hits a certain level. Then we can have a certain level of wage controls that kick in. We can have a certain level of price controls, that kick in. The key factor here is that the MMT economists in the Sanders administration would be putting in more and more automatic stabilizers, which are designed to pull money out of the economy in order to draw down overheating. Yes, there would be more bond sales as well, which is another tool that might be used, to do that. though the record of bond sales since the Second World War to fight that kind of inflation has not been stellar. Still, it may help somewhat. So, more automatic stabilizers introduced into the economy as part of the budgeting process. Also, by the way, we need an expanded budgeting process. We need to have a budgeting process that has spending separate from taxing, so that the tax mechanisms we build into the budget process are not at all targeting the size of the deficit, but instead are building in the automatic stabilizers to automatically contain the deficit spending when we need smaller deficits to cut back on that kind of inflation. There are wage and price controls, as we indicated. There, are bond sales. There are Social Security tax increases. Generally speaking, I would not want a value-added tax. Value-added taxes are regressive and relatively punishing when it comes to poor people. I think a value-added tax is, I may say so, a neoliberal instrument, and I would not want to do that. Now, with respect to Social Security taxes, before we increase those automatically or decrease them automatically when we needed to expand, we want to fix the cap. We want to fix the cap so that there is no Social Security cap. And we probably want to make Social Security taxes more progressive as well. Those would be good things for us to do. Rob says the FJG for the win. Yes, Rob, the FJG for the win. And Kay says Tom needs to have Wolf on for more than 10 minutes at a time. I expressed that on his FB feed today. Yeah, he needs to have us all on for more than 10 minutes at a time. These issues are complex. We need more than 10 minutes to go through them. It's very hard to boil them down in 10 minutes. So Rob says, I got to go now. I'll be back if I can. Kay says, we the poor can't afford anymore. Simple as that. Try living on less than $700 a month. I have to try to do that. I understand, Kay. But also you have to remember, Bernie Sanders is going to end that. You will no longer have to live on $700 a month because he's going to increase Social Security so that the lowest Social Security payment is going to be above the poverty level. So that's probably going to pretty much double your Social Security income. He's promised that. It's in his platform. And Russ says, I have 3 cousins on SSDI at $750 a month. Just ridiculous. Not good at all. Yeah, I know. I know. Actually, Bonnie's SSDI is not much more than that. And Kay says, Joe, that is why I support Bernie, but plus Medicare for all, and I would be free to have a real life again. Oh, yes, you would, and that's not all. That's not all. You would also gain from the Green New Deal program because there would be grants for poor people to buy new vehicles that are electric. That's going to be part of the Green New Deal program. That's going to really help with your energy costs. There's also going to be new public housing and refurbished housing. There will be a great expansion of the housing stock for poor people under Bernie. Kay says, cool, I can't afford to drive anymore. Yeah, Bonnie is pointing out again that I am below the horizon. She's going to have to sit in here with me, make sure I remind myself not to fall below the horizon. Okay, so that's kind of an outline of the various things that can be done to contain demand pull inflation. Uh, uh, Other things that can be done now involve uh, the federal government actually tightening credit so that the private banks won't be creating an excess of money during a period that's inflationary. So that's a tool that can be used, okay, as well. Uh, if we have under Bernie, we'll have a new system where there are more community banks, more small banks. We will have state public banks and postal banks. All those banks will also be doing consumer lending. And once people are keyed into those banks again, they're doing their banking there, then those banks will be able to support an anti inflation program by simply tightening credit. Not so much as to choke off the economy, but they could just contribute to the whole effort to tamp down inflation rather gradually and create a soft landing. So that's another way this could happen. And of course, we can cut back on certain areas of federal spending that are leading to inflation. Okay, says, I would be happy in a tiny house on my own property with a well and solar electric, where I could plant a garden again. And in planting the garden again, you could contribute to sustainable agriculture. How about a garden with a lot of hemp in it? 3 crops per year.
$50,000.
Well, I don't. I'm not going to try to predict how much money can be made that way. Okay, I'm not going to try to predict that.
A lot of things can be made with it.
Okay, so those are the various tools that are in the toolbox of the federal government to contain demand pull inflation should it occur. Now, let's be clear. What is demand pull inflation? It's the state of inflation caused by the fact that the level of aggregate demand is outracing the available supply in the economy as a whole. So, demand pull inflation, okay, is a phenomenon that is about the aggregates in the economy. It's a macro phenomenon. It's not about the kind of inflation, cost push inflation, which we get, okay, in the economy when there are certain areas of supply that have tightened up and are spilling over into other areas and are creating a situation where the areas of inflation are spreading from these relatively few areas where pricing is spreading from those through the whole economy and creating a general phenomenon, okay, of inflation, which is based on really a number of areas of microeconomic inflation in certain the business sectors, okay, of the economy. Uh, so the question is, what can we do to fight supply shocks that hit the economy, like the supply shock that hit the United States from oil during the 1970s? Actually, twice during the 1970s. The first shock was caused by OPEC jacking up oil prices after the 1973 war. And the second was caused by the Saudis jacking up the prices to increase their profits but during the Carter administration. What are the tools the federal government can use to contain that kind of inflation? In other words, to use the exact same tools in the exact same way as we control demand pull inflation would be stronger medicine than is needed, and that might cause really a general depression in the economy when we could bring the economy to a soft landing by containing inflation in those areas of supply that are causing it in the first place. So let's ask ourselves some questions here. The question was brought up earlier that, well, what about the area, okay, of medical care? What's causing inflation there? Is it because we have shortages of people, shortages of doctors, okay, and nurses, shortages, okay, of other resources? Is that what's causing the extreme inflation that we're seeing in the medical care area? I'm afraid I don't think so. I think the causes of inflation in that area are that we have many states in which there are virtual monopolies, okay, or oligopolies involving just a few firms that are either price setting, okay, if they're a monopoly in a particular state, okay, or that are price following, where we have an oligopoly in a particular state and no real competition. In other words, where the competition in the medical industry does not exist, and where the insurers are charging what the traffic will bear. The insurers are not really doing anything to negotiate the prices with the providers. Also, the provider industry is becoming concentrated, okay, as well. But apart from concentration in the provider industry, the insurance companies are not aggressively negotiating prices with the provider industry because the insurance industry, since there are only a small number of them in any state, has the power to pass price increases on to the people who are buying insurance. So there's no free market there. And people buying from the insurance companies are on the receiving end. And people buying from the restricted networks, because the insurance company restricts your networks, okay, of providers, okay, that you can go to, consumers are in no position to bargain with those providers. They have to pay the copays. They have to pay the deductibles. They have to pay the insurance premiums, where the prices are basically administered by the providers or administered by the insurance companies, or by both together. The only way to get rid of that is to get rid of the system we have now and go to Medicare for All, where the government is going to aggressively negotiate with the providers to lower prices across the board. As for the insurance middlemen, they won't be there anymore to drive up the prices. That's going to have a major effect on prices in the insurance industry. Within 4 years, I expect to see that we will reduce the cost of our health care from 18% of GDP to 12%, okay, of GDP after the transition to Medicare for All is over. Yes, Lana, I know I'm frozen. There is, however, very little that I can do about it. except to buy a still more powerful computer, and that option is not open to me. I already upgraded my computer, and it's much better now, but it still can't handle the freezes that I sometimes get, which occur because of the weight of the software, okay, that I'm using. Anyway, okay, so to go back to the issue, within the healthcare industry, okay, I think we have inflation because we have products that people have to take. They don't have any sort of leverage over the price of those products. They have to have the products, they have to have the services because it's a matter of life and death, but for the consumers. So the consumers are at the mercy of the insurance companies, okay, and the providers. What the consumers need is a government working in their interest to lower the provider prices. And so that's going to reduce the level of increase in healthcare costs that we've been experiencing over the last 2 or about 3 years. I think it's going to make a drastic difference in the cost, okay, of healthcare. Showing that one of the tools we can use for cost push inflation, because in healthcare we've been experiencing cost push inflation. That's a prime example of that kind of inflation. Supply side, cost push inflation. We've been getting that in healthcare, okay, whereas other countries don't have that. And the reason why they don't have that is because even though their providers do earn a good living, they keep the providers in check because the governments have an incentive to do so. They negotiate, they keep the providers in check. And what does that mean? It means that one of the primary tools for stopping cost push inflation in a variety of sectors of the economy is regulation. It is regulation. We have to restore regulation. We have to pass new laws, but we also have to have a federal government that will enforce the laws we have. Enforcing the laws we have, okay, is very important. Let's consider the areas which give us the most trouble right now. One of the areas, of course, is the military industrial complex. We have to contain costs in the military industrial complex. One way of containing costs, okay, in the military industrial complex is to make the military industrial complex smaller and to prevent them from lobbying. That again speaks to regulation. Enforcing the regulations we have, implementing new regulations that control our defense industries better, and tougher negotiations by the federal government with those particular industries. Okay, in the real estate area, We need to have the federal government fighting inflation in that area by constructing new housing and refurbishing other housing so that public housing becomes a real alternative for people within the cities that people have to live in to get to their jobs. We have to have a great expansion of that so that housing there is not at such a premium. Furthermore, we have to begin to improve development in rural areas of the United States so people will be able to remain in rural areas, get good jobs in the rural areas. The job guarantee will do a lot for the rural areas. The installation of high-speed internet will do a lot for the rural areas.
Interest rates.
We also have to develop our infrastructure, especially high-speed rail, so people can more easily get into the city centers, so that it will be possible for them to live further out where housing is not at such a premium. Our financial industries are too large right now. Not only too large, but they are clearly charging too much. Credit card interest rates now at an average of 21%. That is gouging. It is usury, absolutely usury. We need to reinstitute the usury laws. We need to regulate and enforce something like 5 points over prime or 6 points over prime for consumer lending. We need to do some of the old things we used to do that made banking boring and that made our financial industries a much lower proportion of our economy. We also need to get off of fossil fuels, because fossil fuels have, of course, environmental costs which are unsustainable. But in addition, the cost of fossil fuels over time is subject to inflation. Right now, it looks like we have a glut, in that area, but that can end, at any time. It's a constant threat to cause supply push inflation, and the best guarantee against such a threat is to get off, of fossil fuels and to turn to energy sources that over a period of time will approach zero cost, of energy. That is also in Bernie's plans. It's also in Bernie's plans. So, there are a whole range of tools that we can use to control supply push inflation. We can control that. We have not been controlling it because under neoliberalism, the federal government would no longer regulate, would no longer regulate. So, it's a combination of regulation, of opening up new sources of supply, and yes, of preventing fraud in those industries. Fraud is inflationary. It drives up costs. Sometimes we don't even see those costs until the economy has crashed. And then it's necessary to bail out the financial sector. Such bailouts drive out costs as a percentage of the economy, as a percentage of our GDP. They unbalance the economy. Crises that are periodic crises, even though they seem to weaken the financial sector in some ways, they also make it the center of attention. So the financial industry knows how not to waste a good crisis and to grab influence over the political system through its very failures. We have to stop that. We have to stop being a prisoner of the financial industry. And we have to get back to the point where the financial industry serves us, not, the other way around. And we can do that partly through regulation, partly through taking over part of the financial industry, like, for example, fully nationalizing the Federal Reserve banks. Okay, there are various things that we can do, and that an MMT approach to controlling inflation would do to control supply push inflation. By the way, we don't want to delude ourselves here into thinking that demand pull inflation is a greater danger for us than supply push inflation. We are not like Zimbabwe or a Weimar Republic or some of the other nations that didn't have control over their own currency. We have control over our currency. We have a floating currency on international exchanges. We don't have debts in any other currency except for our own currency that we create and we control. As a result of that, we cannot have our prices had driven up here in response to essentially making demand pull inflation more and more serious as we go forward. And right now, our deficit spending is far too little to cause demand pull inflation. So, for the near future, when we have the implementation of the Green New Deal, the first kinds of dangers we will get with the Green New Deal will be cost push dangers. Supply side inflation will be the bigger danger. So that's really the kind of danger we want to look out for, the kind of danger that we want to worry about the most. So, That's what I have to say for tonight, okay, about inflation. I hope I've given you a framework. I hope that it's useful to you in thinking about inflation. Okay, if you want to read more about it, the guy who, in my view, is very best when it comes to inflation is actually Bill Mitchell. He has the best writings about it. He's thought about it for years and years and years. There's a world of knowledge, okay, to be gained from his blog. It's tough going. It requires study. I'll be happy to try to distill what he says from time to time, as I've done here tonight. But when it comes to inflation, he is the best thinker that I know. So I recommend his work to you. And Rich Maynard says, evening all. Kay Ryan says, big sick care greed causes it. Before I go further with the discussion, let me not forget to remind you about to please share, like, and subscribe this video. Okay, especially to subscribe. The only place you can subscribe is when this goes up, okay, on the YouTube channel, which it will do within 20 minutes or so after I finish here tonight. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Now let me get back to your comments. So Kay says, I used to work in healthcare before it was for profit. I see the difference better than many people. Yeah, there are big differences. Huge numbers of bankruptcies today, fatalities due to lack of insurance. That is still a scandal. Divorces, there are mortgage defaults. It's all a terrible scene. And Rich said, I just finished doing today's show with Physicians for National Healthcare Policy. I was just trying to share the PowerPoint slideshow, but it will not paste here. Rich, if you can put it up on the web, it should be shareable with a link. If you put up the slideshow, okay, in Google Docs, then you can get a link to it, and you can share the link here. Okay, or you can give it to me and I can share it. I'd be happy to do that. And Kay says, the best and only real job I ever had in my whole life was working on the mail crisis ward at the local the local state hospital, actually mental hospital, before Reagan and Ohio closed it. Great job back then. Turns out I was really good with crazy guys. Laugh out loud. I'm joking. I love my guys there. And Rich says, if you're interested, Joe, but DM me. If anyone else here tonight wishes to talk to me about this, I invite you to DM me as well. Okay, Rich, I'll be happy to do that. Okay, I'm fairly knowledgeable when it comes to Medicare for All and healthcare myself, but I'll be happy to go over your slideshow. Okay, and if you need to convert it to Google Docs, okay, and place it on the web, I think I can probably help you to do that too, if you want. And Kay says, I follow them on Facebook, Richard. And Richard says, not sure how this 71 slides PowerPoint compares to how many posts you have to look at. That's what I'm offering with some discussion. Okay, I'm sure that's a great offering. I take it you don't do live streams yourself. We may be able to arrange a situation where you come on by this show and do your presentation on this show. I can see if I can arrange that. Kay says, I live in Northeast Ohio. The toxic waste dump of fracking. Susan has joined. Lana says, love Bill Mitchell. So do I. And Rich says, okay, I thought you could DM me and I'll mail it. Okay, that's very good. I can, that can certainly work. I'll be happy to DM you and send you my email address, and you can email it to me. That'll work fine. So thank you, Rich. Okay, so by the way, do you go by Rick or Richard, okay, or Dick? What's your preference? Any other comments or questions? I'll give you a minute or two to get those up. Oh, what do you know? My screen just unfroze again. How nice. How's my sound, by the way? I don't think I checked with you about that. So, Rick Maynard says, okay, thanks, Joe. Social media is new to me. I'm a union electrician, no privacy. I could be fired. If not, providing the username, okay, and password Rick. Barbara says sound is perfect. Thank you, Barbara. I was raising the issue a little late. And Russ says the audio has been good all night. Okay, great, Russ. It's great. I'm so glad to hear that. I think I've got that under control now pretty well. Kay says, I'm a tired old bag, so have a peaceful night. Hope to talk again soon. Thank you, Joe, for all you do. Night. And thank you, Kay, for coming and for discussing. Okay, and but please don't be afraid of disagreeing with people here. I very much want this to be an open and tolerant exchange, okay, of views, an open exchange, okay, of views. I want everybody to be friendly here. And if we disagree from time to time, that's fine. That's fine with me. We have to disagree from time to time because that's the way we learn. Okay. And Rich says good night all. I'm sorry. Rick says good night all. And Rick, I'll be happy to DM you as soon as I get off here tonight. Okay. So good night, everybody. Thank you for coming and thank you for staying. And I'll see you again on Saturday night. But tomorrow is a regular day off for me, and I'll take it. I'll be back on Saturday night. Okay, and also next week I'll be back on the regular schedule I keep, which is Monday through Thursday around the 9 o'clock hour, and then Saturday around the 9 o'clock hour. Thank you for coming, Barbara. Russ says, got to call it a night. Well, thanks for coming and for staying, Russ. I know it's fairly late for you. So good night, all. I'm going to end now.